are with What's in Your Wardrobe, and today I've got Andre, an Aussie living in Rome and working for. How are you?
I am really good. Thank you so much for having me.
This is so exciting. You're my first international superstar.
I'm glad to be awesome.
So firstly, how is Rome for a start?
Rome's amazing. So I've been in Rome for 2 years, but I've actually lived in Italy for seven. Previously I was in Milan for 5 years, and then I got a call for a job here in Rome, and so just over 2 years ago I moved down, and so I'm loving it. I'm loving the city, and yeah, it's a different world compared to Milan, so it's nice to be in a city that I love.
It'd be pretty speedy over there, I'd think, like heaps of traffic and the sun would be streaming at the moment, is it? Like, what's the weather like?
Well, now we're kind of changing seasons, so it's getting a little bit cooler. But compared to the north, I mean, it seems like I moved to California from when I was in Milan, so it's nice to have consistent sunny weather all the time. But in winter, it does get quite cold, so I'm preparing myself mentally for that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm so excited to hear what you do at.
Yeah, so I was called down for a job offer after I was working as a pattern maker in Milan. And they wanted to call me in to work on the couture line, so the haute couture line, which shows in Paris 2 times a year. And they kind of wanted me on board because I specialize in draping on the mannequin, which is more of a French practice. It's not a practice which is used much in Italy in regards to pattern making. So usually pattern making in Italy is done on paper with blocks, whereas in France, you're even if you make a t-shirt or a shirt or even a pair of pants, you use the mannequin as your block and you drape on that, and then you get the pattern from that. So I specialize in corsetry and draped styles. I do a bit of everything, but that's kind of my specialty.
Yeah, fantastic. I know a bit about draping and everything like that. It's a real art form. Plenty of
Yeah,
pins and things.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about. I mean, obviously, you've got the contrast with the corsetry, which is quite technical, very mathematical as well. Obviously, if you've got
Mm.
equations get something around the body. And for example, I work a lot with the historical corsetry, especially from the 19th century. So you're working out how much you actually want to pull in the waist, how much you want to push up the bust, and kind of understanding a woman's body to understand that as if you're pulling somewhere, it's got to go somewhere. So how can we kind of maintain what we're actually pulling in? And then with the draping, it's much more free and a little bit more experimental in having forms that kind of you try and make them fall in a way that's really natural because you can see when a dress is really forced. You can see when drapes are really, or like pleats are really pulled in a way because they want the fabric to fall there, but the fabric doesn't want to actually fall like
Mm.
that on the can see it because it creates tension points, which I think visually create unease, like in the actual finished garment. You can see that it's not something that's easy to the eye, if that makes sense.
Mm. It's a pretty
Um,
great skill you've got. Where did you learn that? Because there's not too many people I would think that would be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, pattern making on the paper is something that's practiced kind of globally. Whereas where I got a job, my first kind of serious fashion job in Milan was actually with a guy from Adelaide who had opened
Oh,
up. He had worked in Italian origins and had worked many years in the fashion industry in New York, and then went to Milan and eventually opened up his own studio. And I was his first employee. So his method was draping on the mannequin, and he actually sent me to Paris to do a course to kind of amplify my skills. And so that's kind of went to the heart of where draping kind of started. So yeah, it
and
was a mix, really just watching him work, and then years later actually then learning the actual technique. So I was working for many years without actually knowing the foundations until I went to Paris and actually studied it.
that's amazing. And how long have you been? So, how long have you been actually draping for?
So including, I think about 6 or 7 years. So yeah, before I came to Italy, it wasn't something I'd ever done before. And I think a lot of people have the misconception that draping means it has to be something voluminous or has to be something that's quite free with folds in the fabric. But really, like I said before, you can drape a jersey t-shirt on the mannequin. Instead of using a dress block, you're using your mannequin, which obviously has to be the perfect
Mm.
size or your model or whatever the finished client is, and you drape everything. You drape a shirt, you drape the collar, you drape the sleeve. So it's quite intuitive. It's very, very much trial and error until your eye begins to understand the forms that a sleeve should have or a collar should have, and yeah, it takes a bit of time to get it right. But yeah, it's a very personal and very I think artisanal way of getting to a final product that has a bit of soul in it, which is something that's missing, I guess, from the flat pattern making.
Oh, absolutely. Because actually, what you're working with absolutely beautiful fabrics. I'm assuming they'd be amazing. And really, the only way to work with them is draping it because you wouldn't get the whole look on a flat pattern. It kind of flattens the whole thing, really. Draping would
And
give you that fluidness.
yeah, I mean, it really it really depends a lot of what you're actually wanting to create as well. Like for example, to get to a look on the runway, we might do up to 7 or 8
Mm,
prototypes. Yes.
wow.
And then for the clients, you might do, even more.
Mm,
Um, like a glove. But it really depends on the style. Having a clientele and making sure that our sizing is standardized as well. You are often working from a block, but depends. If you've got a simple shift dress, to drape it on the mannequin is something that I was doing at my previous work. Whereas here we have to really standardize the fact that you've got a clientele who expects a certain fit of the garments.
mm.
So got a flat pattern block, you kind of start from there. But then I'm kind of making the twirl of it and re-seeing it on the mannequin and just really fiddling with it until I'm just like happy with the result, and then you put it into the final fabric. So you've already kind of seen your dress before you've sewn it. So that even though it takes longer to get to your final pattern, you're cutting out the whole uncertainty of making a flat pattern, sewing it up, and realizing that you're not actually achieving what you wanted to. So by working on the mannequin, I think you've got a really good visual representation that allows you to pick up problems before you've actually got sewing your final fabric.
Mm. And you're working directly with the designers on this too, aren't you?
Yeah, so the work of I think the misconception of the work of a pattern maker is that people assume that you're kind of designing or you're proposing designs. I mean, in general, a pattern maker is a job that is quite mathematical and and most of the time not very creative, because if you're working in ready to wear, the sketch is given to you with specific measurements. And so if you're making a jacket that's, that length, that jacket has to be that length. It's not something that you can really contribute much to. And then a flat pattern making, has a lot to do with formulas around the body. So it's all mathematical. Whereas
Mm,
when you're working with couture, which is so experimental, and also you're only making 2 seasons a year instead of 4 seasons as ready to wear is, you've got more time to really push the limits to your fabrics and your design. So sometimes the designer will give me a sketch of what they have in their mind, and sometimes you'll get a mood image and they say, look, this is the mood for the dress. See what you can propose to me. So I will drape on the mannequin and call the designer, and together we'll tweak it until we get what they want. But as for designing a final idea in couture, it's very rare that your first prototype will go through.
mm. Yeah, I can't believe that you make up to seven because, in the market that I've been working in, we're trying to cut down as many as we can cut down to save money, and you're making seven of them. That's unbelievable.
If you're lucky, only 7. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's incredible. And so I'm assuming that what's the speed of, first getting the design and then coming out with the actual product in the end? Because seven
Yeah,
must take quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about because we only show twice a year, we've got 6 months between every runway show. But you have to consider the fact that these are garments that most of them are embellished in a way that is all done by hand. So I mean, essentially 6 weeks before the show in Paris, you have to have seen your final patterns to be embellished. So it means that you've cut out a month and a half of working on it. And then you might do a month of experimentation where you really are doing little fabric swatches of fabric manipulation, different finishings, different embellishment, all these different things that they're wanting to see. And then you start with kind of your base um, pieces, and you work from there. You have fitting after fitting, and they just get chopped and changed, chopped and changed. And as soon as you think you're done with it, they'll change it again. And then the embellishment will come to change it again because the embellishment, for example, last season I had a dress that was 12 kilos.
Oh my
And so
God.
my corsetry work underneath, you have to consider that a model doesn't have, um, the breasts to hold up that type of dress. So you
Mm.
have to kind of anchor on their waist and on their hips. So it also becomes a game sometimes, a bit of architecture, trying to make sure the dress actually stays up on the model. There's kind of a big rush after the runway of orders because instead of buyers coming to choose the items that they want to buy for their stores, with couture you're direct to the client, so the clients come in after the runway show. I mean, people forget that that a fashion week is made so that buyers can come all to the same location without having to go all around the world to see these fashion shows. So after we do the show which is always in Paris because it's Haute Couture, the day after uh, the studio opens, with where the clients directly go to the showroom and select the dresses that they want to buy. We take their measurements, etc. And then so we might have a month where we're really overloaded with orders from the clients, and then after that we get straight into the next season. So you really just don't even have any time to enjoy, kind of smell the flowers. You really don't have time to do that.
And I suppose when they come in to get fitted, then the draping in a way will start all over again because that pattern won't, depending on the size and the shape of the person that you're making it for, that might not work with them at all.
And so there's a big question about, that's where kind of the sensibility of a pattern maker comes in, and that's where it's not about creativity, but really about understanding, or um, also kind of different body shapes and also proportions. Because a model that's a size 38, Italian 38, some of my clientele is a much bigger than that. So how do we kind of get that finished look on, obviously, a woman, a real woman that's also not that tall. So you have to consider these things of how do we get that image on this client while maintaining kind of the same look. And so it's always a bit
It's
of a challenge.
tricky.
Made to measure is my favorite part of the job. Yeah, it's something that I really enjoy doing.
So, you personally would work with the actual client then?
No, so everything's quite, we have to consider that haute couture is a very niche market with clientele that are very discreet, and very much a group. The haute couture is a syndicate, so you have to be part of the group to be able to attend the shows, to be able to buy, etc. It's a very complicated and very hidden world as well. So I would very rarely have contact with the direct clients unless I might be asked to go and fit them. But it depends. Sometimes with the celebrities, I'm able to go myself. But, being a young guy representing a historical fashion house, the clientele also expect a certain type of,
Mm.
elderly seamstress that might go and fit their dresses for them, for example. So, that's also something to consider. As much as it's, so exciting and so new, it's really a heritage group that kind of prides themselves on this image. So it's also understanding where it's appropriate for me to be present or not. So that's yeah, part of the job as well.
Yeah. And I guess that's something that comes in the future kind of thing. But also, they've got a preconceived idea, as you say, that it's in every movie, it's the old man or woman with the tape measure around their neck.
La sarta, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I'm assuming you wouldn't be the only pattern maker.
No, so for couture, there's four pattern makers on couture, and then with the ready to wear, there's many more. So we've got a quite a big team of pattern makers. So yeah, pinching myself every day.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it'd be pretty unbelievable. Did you do your schooling, your original fashion schooling in Melbourne?
yeah. So I did. I did my. I did an honors in Melbourne at RMIT. I did it. Yeah, it was a bachelor of fashion design with honors, and that was a really good base for what I'm doing now. But when you're talking about things like couture or alta moda, there's really no way you can learn it unless you're in it. There's no books. There's no, I mean, there's a bazillion ways, you would know, there's a bazillion ways you can get to a final product or a final finishing. There's many ways, multiple, even just like a bias bind to finish off a neckline. There's seven different ways that you can get to that.
Mm.
You know, from industrialized all the way to completely by hand in couture. So I mean, really, once you're in it, your learning process begins with every season getting shapes that are different, working with different fabrics, working with different embellishments is the biggest challenge. And then just learning season after season, okay, well, that shape in that fabric tends to do this, tends to give us that problem. I remember that season I did that dress and that was an issue, so let's try and avoid that this time. And so you really just need experience to really understand how to work with these fabrics and understand people don't understand that you can have an amazing pattern, but if it's sewn by a seamstress that's not careful and made in a fabric that's not adequate to that design, you're never going to get what you're
Yeah.
hoping for. You can't force the fabric to do what it doesn't want to do. I know how like romanticized that sounds, but really, until you're working with fabrics and also like the same fabric in two different colors, if you've got a black and you've got pink of the same exact fabric in the same article, they'll do different things. If you've got a bias cut dress, they'll
Mm.
do completely with the same pattern. So that's why in couture we always leave massive seam allowances of up to 8 centimeters everywhere
Yeah,
because you never know.
right.
Yeah,
Because basically with those things too, it can be even the black versus the white in the heaviness of the dye stuff in those
so,
really beautiful fabrics.
so you get it because it's like even if you've got a knitted cardigan, one's black and one's white. The black's never going to be as soft as the white. So it's also to consider these things. And when you're working with dresses on bias that are already quite, a bias dress, especially when it's fitted, I mean, will do things that you could never predict the fabric would do. Like, one side of the dress might have 8 centimeters that's longer than the other. It's quite common. And so
And
people don't
it's
understand
annoying.
well, when you go and buy, a bias cut, these new dresses are quite in with the skirts are in for a little bit with like a bias cut silk skirt from Zara. But if you mass produce that, you can't wrap your head around how that can fall on the body in a way that looks good in mass production. Like, you can kind of get there, but you're never not going to have puckering seams.
No, that's right. It's so
If I
hard. And it's actually hard, like if you're dealing with a customer, you know, basically, how do you explain to them when things aren't working right? You know, they just expect it to be magic, basically.
People expect, things to be picture perfect.
Mm.
If I do a corset in a duchess and and I'm sewing the seams, you're never not going to have I guess the kind of gathering that happens in the waist. Doesn't matter how well it's sewn, you're never not going to have that. But if you look at a
No,
Dolce Gabbana show that they specialize in corsetry, it's always got it. So why should we expect that clothes are going to fall perfectly on the body when we're moving around? And so it's kind of this misunderstanding also of seeing these perfect photos in magazines and realizing, well, like on the body, it's never going to sit like that. And, you know, even though you'd like it to do that, maybe physically, like it's not possible for me to create that sketch that the designer has given me. Maybe physically the fabric just, I'm not able to get it to do what you want it to do. So it's also about being realistic and understanding the limitations and yeah, just really understanding all around. You know, if you're a designer, you need to know about patterns, you need to know about fabrics, and not, you know, design something and then choose your fabric, because it doesn't really work like that.
And are they nice to you when you say, "Oh, sorry, I can't do it. It's impossible to do it that way"?
Part of our, I think a part of most aspects of the evolution of a fashion collection is kind of trying to sell yourself and sell also what's like not gonna happen.
Yeah,
So it's a tug of war. You got to
yeah,
try
for
and,
sure.
you're always saying no, but you're, you know, if you, they're not really working with the fabric between the hands, until sometimes you just have to be like, "Do you know what? That's fine. I'm gonna make the dress the way that you think that it's going to come out, and I'll show you that it doesn't work," because sometimes until they've got it in front of them, they can't really wrap their head around it. And so that's also understanding that, you know, a designer that really doesn't have experience with sewing or with pattern making. And I think it's something that now we're seeing through the creative directors of fashion houses, where it's not a prerequisite to know a bit about everything, and that's
Mm.
becoming a really big issue in the industry.
Yeah, I can totally understand what you're talking about, because there's also things like when the garment's hung for a while, the the hem can be all over the place when it's draped. So leveling things out, and then when's it going to stop dropping?
Yeah, it's like, especially like what you were saying before with bias. I mean, ideally, you'd cut your panels out and you'd let them hang for, you know,
Mm.
48 hours. With you, they get pinned to a board and they grow. And so you have to compensate with your pattern. If it's growing, your skirt is also going to get tighter. So it's
Yeah,
also to be able to compensate with your pattern so that you're not going to have a skirt that's too tight and too long. But we all know that we probably don't have 48 hours to let that fabric drop. So it's quite fun.
I made a velvet cut on the cross, long, full length
Uh,
skirt, and I was just going, why did
Courage.
like why did I do this? It would have been so much easier if I just had to cut it normally, but it just doesn't give that look.
And do you know what I love? Like you can just have, um, you know, the shape that a bias cut skirt has. Like whether you like it or not, it's going to be slightly mermaid, like whether you like it
Mm.
or not. That's
But
what's
I
so
love
special.
that look.
Stretch. It becomes stretch and you can walk in it, but
Mm.
have a slimming and quite slinky look, but you can walk in it. So I think it's also very practical. I mean, but it's fun, you know, when you've got these massive gowns with all these meters of fabric, and you know the designer won't design in, you know, seams in it. And I say, well, if I'm cutting it on the bias, obviously the height of your fabric is greatly reduced, and it's something that you know, like you were saying before, do you ever, you know, butt heads with them, trying to make them understand with these certain things? Oh, I didn't want the seam there. Yes, but it's not negotiable. The fabric ends. I can't do anything about
Exactly.
that. So for they don't understand why a beautiful bias skirt has to have a seam in the, you know, what we would call a spicule, which would be literally an insert.
Mm.
They just don't, not really up for negotiation.
Why do I have to have that zip in the garment so people can get in it?
Like, how silly. They should be able to just hop in without any problem, right? Completely.
Exactly. My head won't fit in that.
Exactly, story of my life, but it's fun. Keeps it interesting.
Absolutely. And are there any secrets you can tell us? I don't even know what a secret would be.
Yeah, I mean, I
One
think like,
terrible story like a of a shocking epic fail or
yeah, I'm just trying to think. I mean, you know, with my patterns, sometimes, you know, you're working on dresses that, you know, the value of them is just,
mm,
you can't imagine. You really just can't imagine. And so sometimes I'm making a pattern for, you know, the final piece for the runway. And you send the piece off to be all embroidered by hand. And like I said, some of them will take up to six weeks to do all by hand. And the pattern piece will come back. And if you've made an error on your pattern,
Oh, I know. I don't think my nerves couldn't stand it actually. But sometimes what I find when I'm doing something, the things that go wrong, I feel like it actually in the end makes a better garment somehow. It's like it's supposed to happen that way to for you to invent a new thing or for something. It just ends up working. I don't know why. It's good. It's just that if the customer gets involved and goes, well, I didn't want it that way, well, and they can't have it the way that they want it, that's where the issue becomes.
yeah, I mean, I think I think a really overall theme at the moment, Sharon, in the industry in general, and I don't think it's just in fashion, we're so detached from the source that people really don't know anything about their clothes or where they
Yeah.
come from.
Yeah.
Or you know what? It's kind of ignorance is bliss because most people don't actually want to know why that bias cut skirt from Zara does cost 15 euros or
Mm.
dollars. So it's kind of like you can say maybe I'm conscious with fashion, but could you say the same thing about food? Like, do you go to a shop where you buy, your apples are cheaper, but you don't really want to know why an apple costs more over there and why it costs less in that
Yeah.
shop, but saving a bit of money, so that's fine. So it's kind of this ignorance is bliss that I find is really just in society in general at the moment. And so people, like you're saying, they're demanding things that they really don't understand.
Yeah.
So
I
when you're
fully
doing
agree.
client work, clients just can't wrap their head around. I mean, I can't be expected to, I wouldn't question a rocket science as to why I can't get that rocket to look that way. So,
Yeah.
but fortunately, with creative things that are visual, people really do think that it's limitless, and it's not necessarily the case.
That's so true. Well, thank you so much. I think we're just about to get cut off because I can see the clock going over. But I have had so much. I'd love to do this again with you. It's been so interesting. I've
You hear from my voice how passionate I am. So I'd love to chat more about this stuff. And really, I think it's quite informative for people that do our work, but also don't know anything about our work and should, because it's something that we
absolutely.
should
Yeah.
understand. Come to us, and so it's something I'm really passionate about in regards to sustainability, not of the planet, but of actually the people that are making our clothes. Is something I'd really love to discuss more. So yeah,
I'd love to do that. Let's do another session and talk about the sustainability of it all as well.
I would love that.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
I'll talk to you later.
Bye from Roma. Ciao.
Ciao.